Lights in the sky, beams of fire cutting through rooftops, entire villages paralyzed in fear, and soldiers sent into the Amazon to hunt what should not exist. This wasn't a horror film. It wasn't a myth whispered in the dark. It was a real military operation carried out in northern Brazil in the late 1970s. Locals called it by many names, but history remembers it as Operation Prato, one of the most disturbing, well-documented UFO cases on record. Hundreds of witnesses, dozens of attacks, scars that never healed, and a silence that still hangs heavy over the files of the Brazilian Air Force. In America, most people have heard of Roswell. But in Brazil, there is Collars, and its legacy is far more terrifying. The year was 1977. Brazil was under strict military rule, and the northern states were remote, wild, and often forgotten by the rest of the country. In the fishing villages spread across the island of Collars and along the muddy rivers of Para, life moved slowly, dictated by the tides, the catch of the day, and the setting sun. But that peace was shattered when strange lights began descending from the sky. They weren't stars, weren't planes, and certainly not lanterns. They moved with purpose, following fishermen on the water and shining down beams that pierced through the darkness. These were not distant points of light. They came close, close enough to burn skin, drain blood, and leave behind bodies marked by something far beyond human technology. Brazil was about to face its most chilling brush with the unknown. It began quietly, with isolated fishermen along the coast. Men who knew the sea better than anyone started returning home in panic, their bodies marked by burns they couldn't explain. Some collapsed unconscious after being struck by beams of light. Others described the terrifying sensation of being drained, as if their very energy, or their blood, was being pulled from them. One man died, several more carried scars that never faded. The people called these lights chupa-chupa, the suck-suck, because they seemed to feed on life itself. Fear spread like wildfire. By nightfall, entire villages refused to sleep, posting men with torches outside while families huddled inside and prayed. But prayers were no match for what descended from the heavens. The island of Collars, just off the northern coast of Brazil, became the epicenter of this nightmare. Women and men alike told stories of glowing orbs crossing above their homes, then slicing down beams of concentrated light directly through their rooftops, as if tiled clay meant nothing. Survivors described the rays leaving behind deep needle-like punctures on their skin, crimson marks where blood had been taken by force. One of the most infamous cases was Aurora Fernandez, whose wounds looked like deliberate surgical extractions. Another was Nilo Braga, a man nearly carried into the sky when a beam paralyzed his body and pulled him upward. He screamed, clung desperately to the edge of his roof, and only survived by hiding under a cart as the craft circled above him. He lived. But Collars would never sleep peacefully again. By late 1977, the fear had reached breaking point. Villagers were injured. Rumors of deaths circulated. The local police and officials admitted they could do nothing to protect the islanders from what came out of the sky. The cries for help reached the Brazilian Air Force. The 1st Regional Air Command, based in Belém, decided to act. They assembled a special unit of 25 men led by Commander Wirange Holanda, a stern officer who had little patience for superstition. To him, it was hysteria, exaggeration, the frightened folklore of poor fishermen and desperate villagers. He accepted the mission expecting to find nothing more than rumors. But the operation would prove far stranger than anything he could have imagined. They called it Operação Prato, Operation Plate. And soon, Holanda himself would wish he had never heard the name. The soldiers set up camp on the edge of Collars and began their night watches. For days, the skies seemed empty, taunting them with silence. But then the lights came. Unlike anything they had trained for, they moved intelligently, circling slowly, then darting away at impossible speeds. Some hovered above houses before shooting up into the night. Others slipped toward the rivers, reflecting across the black waters of the Amazon as though toying with their observers. Holanda, once a skeptic, was forced into silence as he lifted his binoculars and saw the shape clearly, a massive luminous craft, metallic outlines visible even in the dark, suspended in the sky. He later admitted it gave off a low turbine hum before it accelerated so violently into the clouds that not a single leaf in the forest stirred. For the commander and his men, the question had changed forever. The UFOs were not hysteria. They were real. And they were hunting. What the Air Force documented would later make Operation Prato one of the most unique UFO cases in the world. The soldiers carried cameras, lenses, and film. Over weeks of missions, they claimed to have taken more than 500 photographs and logged detailed sketches of craft that defied all understanding. Even more shocking were the reports that 15 hours of film footage were shot, reels that captured glowing discs maneuvering with impossible agility, objects plunging into rivers and emerging seconds later, and even shapes of beings glimpsed behind the domes of some craft. While only parts of the photographic archive were eventually released decades later, enough remained to confirm that the Brazilian military did not dismiss what they saw. Their reports described behaviors and maneuvers no known aircraft in 1977, or even today, could replicate. But beyond cameras and military reports were the people of colors, who bore the weight of terror on their very skin. Aurora Fernandez showed photographs of her arms and chest marked with deep, needle-like punctures. Doctors struggled to explain how she had lost blood yet no veins had burst, the wounds clean and deliberate. Nilo Braga became known as the man almost stolen by the lights, clinging to the roof of his home before throwing himself under a wooden cart as villagers screamed. Others described being paralyzed in their beds, unable to move as beams cut through tiled ceilings and struck them like invisible spears. Some survivors whispered of floating, pulled helplessly toward the glittering orbs before collapsing unconscious on the ground. Families began gathering at night in groups, clutching rosaries, hoping there was safety in numbers. But no one truly felt safe. The sky was theirs no longer. As weeks turned into months, whispers spread that not all of Operation Prato's evidence stayed in Brazil. Witnesses claimed that reels of film, original photographs, and classified reports were flown out of the country and into American hands. Years later, physicist Hal Puthoff, connected to secret Pentagon programs, admitted publicly that he had examined Brazilian military UFO footage, including material from the caller's events. If true, that would mean the United States not only had access to the evidence, but may still hold it under lock and key. Behind closed doors, there appeared to be an agreement between the Brazilian government and U.S. intelligence: let some photographs surface, but keep the most shocking evidence hidden from the public eye. For the people of colors, it felt like the truth of their terror was stolen, buried in archives half a world away. Meanwhile, the story released to the media painted a very different picture. Newspapers reassured the public that nothing had happened but collective hysteria, frightened villagers whipping themselves into panic over imagined lights. The Brazilian Air Force, at least in its official statements, echoed this story. Yet their internal reports told another tale: objects performing turns so sharp that human pilots would have been crushed by the G-forces, craft with shapes that shifted between discs, eggs, and cylinders, lights that penetrated roofs and skin alike. Privately, the military acknowledged what they had seen was real, structured, and completely beyond human technology. Publicly, they chose silence. And that silence has lasted decades. For Commander Wirange Holanda, Operation Prato was not just another assignment. At the start, he was a skeptic, confident he would debunk fishermen's tales. By the end, he was a changed man. Holanda became consumed by what he had seen: the giant craft hovering in silence above the forest, the beams that paralyzed villagers, the terror etched across the faces of his soldiers. Officially, the operation ended in late 1977, and the files were sealed tight. But Holanda could not let it go. In the years after retiring, he continued to investigate privately, haunted by memories that gave him no peace. By 1997, he finally agreed to a bombshell interview with a leading UFO magazine in Brazil, breaking 2 decades of silence. Months later, he was found dead in his home, officially a suicide. For many, his death only deepened the shadows hanging over Operation Prato. Had the truth weighed so heavily that it consumed him, or had someone silenced the man who knew too much? Despite the official denials, the legacy of Operation Prato refused to disappear. International researchers began calling it the Brazilian Roswell, though in truth it was much larger: dozens of direct victims, weeks of military surveillance, and hundreds of photographs and pages of testimony. To this day, it remains the largest official military investigation of UFOs in South America. Over the decades, pieces of evidence were slowly released: handwritten military reports, sketches, and a fraction of the original photos. Each release only fueled more questions. In recent years, documentaries, including a short film in 2024 that used AI reconstructions, have reignited interest, bringing the story of callers to a new global audience. But the bulk of what was collected has never been made public. The most chilling evidence, if it survives, is still locked away, perhaps in files neither Brazil nor America wishes to open. And so we are left with questions that no government has ever answered. What were the lights that descended onto callers? Why did they focus on humans, shining beams directly into homes, piercing skin, draining blood? Were they experiments, harvests, messages, or something darker that we cannot yet comprehend? If all of it was hysteria, why did hardened military officers describe structured craft performing impossible maneuvers? Why photograph and film hundreds of hours of nothing? Why classify the evidence and, as some claim, send it overseas to the United States? The contradictions are too deep to ignore. Decades later, the survivors of callers still remember the nights when the skies turned hostile, when prayers and locked doors offered no protection. Operation Prato remains one of the most disturbing cases of mass UFO contact the world has ever seen, not just a story of lights in the sky, but of people hunted, wounded, and forgotten. Officially, it was hysteria. Unofficially, it was something far beyond hysteria. And for those who carry the scars to this day, one truth will never change: sometimes the fear doesn't come from the shadows around us, it comes from the sky above. If this story kept you looking over your shoulder, don't let it be the last. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a like to keep the channel growing. Most of all, tell me in the comments what mystery you want to see uncovered next. Because the shadows are full of secrets, and together, we'll drag them into the light.